Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming to our panel relatively early on a Sunday morning. Our talk is Teaching with Video Games, How Not to Screw It Up. And just to get a sense of who's here, could you just raise your hand if you're actually like an educator or a researcher? Fantastic. Thank you. Hands down. If you're just somebody who likes games and thinks this is an interesting topic to you. Great. Okay, perfect. That helps us a lot. So we're going to start today. We'll do a quick introduction of each of ourselves, and we're going to talk a bit about a lot of the sort of common things people think of when they think of games in education, and our goal is to sort of expand your ideas of how you can use games to teach people. So I'm Lisa Castaneda. I am a CEO and co-founder of Foundry 10, which is based out of Bellevue, Washington. We do research and programs in non-traditional learning, and right now we're doing a bunch of different things involving commercial video games. Prior to that, I was a teacher, and I taught grades K through 8, ended up teaching middle school, and taught primarily math classes. So.
I'm Tom Swanson. I am program strategist at Foundry 10. I got a lot of the research and programs that we run and offer to kids. My background is in marketing. I kind of started that way since I wanted to study how people make decisions and react, but I thought I wanted to do that in business. However, I found over time that games were my real kind of passion, and I wanted to bring those to other people, and that's how I found my way here.
So I'm Adam Norige. I work for MIT. So I build technology, particularly for operational environments like emergency response, and I'm trying to use games to understand how people make decisions and how we can either train them to make better decisions or explore technologies that could help in that process, and games are a centerpiece to that.
Pete Pellegrino. I'm kind of all over the place. The slide says tabletop history. That's my own small educational consulting company that we use war games in educational environments. My real paycheck comes from a company, Cubic, and they turned around and sold me to the United States Naval War College, where I do war game design, addressing national security and strategy problems. I also do it for U.S. forces overseas, and what else I do? Oh, and I also consult with Hasbro. So pretty kind of cross-cut, by the way. And someplace in there I also do business gaming for companies who are trying to use game strategy to understand their marketplace and how to undo their competitors. So it's everything from high-end government stuff down to the fun stuff.
So one of the first things that comes to mind when people think about games in education is edutainment, and I think probably most people in this room have had some experience with, like a math blaster, a Zoom beanies, those types of things. And when we put together this slide, we picked this is frog fractions over here, and then I don't know if you're familiar. The other thing is a mad minute. Has anybody heard of a mad minute? Okay, yes. So you have a minute to solve as many math problems as you possibly can, and we think that there is a place for edutainment. I mean, I used edutainment games when I taught math, but they serve a really specific and narrow purpose. So for instance, I was at a talk not long ago from a university that had created a game that you were traveling through a banana tree, and the point was to teach you about osmosis and phloem and xylem and all this stuff, and the graphics were great and kids seemed to enjoy playing the game, but the fact of the matter was that what you would walk away with is an understanding of exactly that, and probably not more. So we think that it's a very sort of narrow viewpoint of what you could actually access when using a video game to teach someone.
The other thing that is pretty common in classrooms, especially recently, is gamification. And I mean, I'm sure many of you have Steam and have dealt with badges and snow globes. This kind of an idea of giving people sort of an arbitrary gift for something that they do, or like a math problem they solve or a project they complete, is good. I mean, so when I was in, I guess, elementary school, we had teacher bucks. I mean, did you guys ever do any like classroom-based currency? Whoa. Hold on. I got it. Keyboard. Here we go. I'm used to a mouse, not to touch it. So anyway, we had teacher bucks where you would generate money for doing math problems, and then you'd spend those on like a pencil or one of those little flingy things you'd shoot at your friends. So the idea, though, is you're not going to motivate a kid to really get invested in their learning by saying, "Hey, at the end of the quarter, you can afford a koosh ball with this Monopoly money that I'm giving you." It's not really like a fundamental shift in a concept in learning. It's just trying to engage kids in a different way, something that is, I guess, shown to work in games where somebody's already invested or engaged anyways.
And I think the context is really important because when you think about games that you play, you're really invested in what you're doing and you want to earn those achievements and you want to do those things because you're in this game and you see value in it. But if we just take that away and sort of give people badges for doing stuff that, you know, oh, if you finish your homework on time, it's not the same. It takes away sort of the legitimacy.
Yeah, and I'll pile on that in terms of where gamification is getting, again, like they said, it's got narrow application that was originally designed around engagement and brand loyalty, where it's most effective. If you've got an airline miles, preferred, you're in a gamified environment. Okay? You're getting reward points, you've got levels, but the value of the reward is, hey, a free airline ticket to Hawaii, eventually. Maybe. But the reward is tied to the activity and it's got value to you. The little trophy icon that the kid gets does not necessarily contain any value. I'm required to do annual computer security training because of some of the companies I work with. And somebody thought gamifying my security training would be a good idea. Oh my God. At one point in the training, it's asked, you know, it's giving me a bunch of learning points, and it's going to test my retention of this information. So you usually get the typical inline test now where it's going to ask me a question. If I get it wrong, it's going to take me back to that part of the material to get me to review it. No, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play a game of Rock'em Sock'em Robots, where every question I get right, my robot throws a punch at the other robot. Every one I get wrong, the enemy robot throws a punch at me. All this does is extend the time I'm doing training I don't want to do in the first place. And it just set everyone's teeth on edge. They finally actually removed the Rock'em Sock'em Robot part from the training. But all the other stupid games are still in there. And at the end of it, it shows you these little trophies. If you got 100% in a module, you got a trophy. And if you didn't, you still passed the training. But it asks you, do you want to go back and try to improve your score? Why on God's green earth would I want to go back and do this? So again, it's the gamification off the rails. Someone heard it. There's a great Dilbert cartoon out there on gamification. Just Google Dilbert and gamification. It pretty much makes the point.
So I think one of the words that Pete brought up was the idea of engagement, and that's another word that you hear thrown around a lot when you talk about bringing video games into the classroom. And I've spoken in front of lots of groups of teachers where it's like, I really want to engage my students. And if you've ever been in a room full of middle school or high school students, like engagement's a losing battle. Like even if you have the flashiest, most interesting thing, if it's solely based on just trying to engage them, you're going to lose ultimately because they're going to lose interest in it. And so one of the points we're going to talk about today is the idea of enhancing what you do through the use of video games. And I think we put the bullet picture because we're trying to say, you know, in education, we're always looking for that magic bullet, that one thing. And I feel like video games right now are kind of becoming that thing that, oh, if we just bring games into the classroom, but if they're not brought into the classroom well and they're not well thought out, then you're almost probably doing more harm than good.
So the idea is that the actual play of games, and ultimately we will in the creation, has value in learning just by itself. So I mean, if I play, you know, Dota or League of Legends, I'm going to be developing hopefully communication skills, although we'll see with those games. But you're definitely going to have some kind of collaboration if you want to win. There's problem solving involved in games of all kinds. I mean, we put up this world to kind of give an idea, but there's so much more to it than you can put in just a little, you know, text and color word diagram, no matter how it's formatted up there.
Yeah, and I just have a question, really kind of looking at the audience. I assume everybody that's here for PAX is a gamer at some level, correct? Mm-hmm. Right.
Or you just stumbled in somehow. Saw a crowd, started to follow it.
Yeah. You know, so just think through, you know, kind of your own gameplay, whatever game you play, whether it's, you know, computer games or tabletop games. I'm sure there's some value that you can look at and say, you know what? This has helped me in other things in my life, you know, not just in games. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges is trying to figure out how that transfers. Because I think we can all shake our head and say, yeah, it happens. We know it happens. But in looking at this education space, and especially when you're talking to the outside world and, you know, other people who may not, you know, kind of feel that, you know, that benefit of games, is making them understand that that transfer happens as well.
So how many of you have kids of game playing age? Okay. They can start really early. That's what Candyland's for. All right? Candyland is not a bad game for teaching rules. That's the point of Candyland. It teaches rule following, game constructs. There was a column in the Wall Street Journal. So, Wall Street Journal. And the columnist, and I've got her article in front of me here, Demetria Galagos, she goes through and highlights all the social value that she's seen her kids accrue through gameplay, and they are a game-playing family. Okay? I told you I consult with Hasbro. So Hasbro, world's largest board game maker. That's like saying the world's largest buggy whip maker. Right? They understand that they've got a challenge in terms of the relevancy and desire of board gaming and people buying board games. Yet the Wall Street Journal article points out that this woman says, I'm in a gaming family. We play games all the time. And what she has seen come out of it for her kids, and I'll just right from the thing here, is taught them to be good actors. And she sees not in that now they can lie to people, but they are able to convincingly present themselves in situations where they're trying to carry a message, because they've played Pictionary. They've played those games that force you to communicate in a way that is under time pressure, and it's got to be effective or you lose. There's nothing like the pressure of winning and losing to drive behavior. It's improved their vocabulary, presentation skills, and grace under fire, taught them to be great guessers. And her point here is, in terms of like playing Trivial Pursuit and being able to eliminate the 2 answers that don't apply, narrows it down to the 2 that probably do, that sounds like the SAT. Okay? How do you learn how to eliminate the distractors in multiple choice type questions? And in a world where standardized testing is not going away anytime soon, that's a critical skill. Critical thinking, sportsmanship, and patience. And she said probably one of the biggest things is they don't fear failing. Because they've lost a game and the world didn't end. Okay? So again, all value that, again, I know I'm preaching to the choir to some extent, right? Because you get it, but you gotta make sure that your kids get it and that you tell people this type of value. So, I mean, kind of the rest of our talk is then trying to see how we can expand on that innate value that we understand as gamers, and how do we bring that value to institutions, specifically education.
So, kind of a transition point. So we wanted to kind of break down some of the fundamental aspects of games that we thought were really vital and transferable. So we're first going to talk a little bit about the inner and outer objectives inherent in games, then the aspect of creativity, both in playing and in design, and how that can be applied to learning, and then decision making, which is obviously a huge component of this.
Yeah, so we look at the process of actually making games. Has anybody been through the process of building a game? Kind of done it before? So would you agree generally it follows something like this? And this is what I've come to use over time. Where you first got to start with your objectives, your kind of outer objective, what are you trying to do? And then you enter this phase where you're building the game, and that's usually some sort of spiral process where you're building, testing, failing, taking things out, putting things in. And then at the end, what we do is a lot of, you play the game and you collect data and you do a lot of evaluation, trying to understand this game space. And so, I would say that, a lot of good, serious games should fit this mold a little bit. And so there are a lot of things that are labeled serious games that I don't fit this mold. Nothing against them, they may have other purposes. But if you're not doing the first and the last piece, I think it's kind of questionable, kind of what are you trying to do there, unless you're just making something for somebody else to use. So I just want to talk a little bit more on the objectives. So if we go to the next slide. When we build games, we tend to think of 2 levels of objectives. One being kind of what are you trying to do with the game? What's your objective as a designer, right? So if you don't have that figured out, it's kind of hard to go to the next one, which is what we call sometimes the inner objective, or what do you want your players to do, right? And so it's one thing to start to to state those, right? It's good to have them down on paper. The hard part is making them relate, right? And proving to other people that they relate, right? So, and I think Pete has a good analogy that you can talk about, kind of the further apart they are, the kind of the hard game design. But
yeah, the idea here is if you think about when we call outer objective, that's purpose. What's this game supposed to do? Why this game? So if you take your typical family game, okay, the reason you're playing it isn't, if it's in the case of Monopoly, isn't that you're trying to teach real estate techniques to your kids. It's terrible, okay? The purpose is often, hey, I want to spend some time in a family game environment around the kitchen table. You know, it's the infamous quality time type thing. So the purpose, why play, is for the social engagement, the entertainment value, the time spent within a social group. Now the objective of the game is far different. It's to drive all the players out. Okay, except for one, which actually makes it terrible at its purpose. But again, the idea in serious games, in the environment that I work in, often I've got a sponsor who's got a real world problem in terms of strategy, in terms of policy, or in the business space in terms of a competitor and losing market share. So that's why they want to play a game. But I'm not going to then tell the players, hey, we're playing this game to help solve problems in the Middle East. It's going to go right past them. You're playing this game to win a very specific, narrowly defined objective. Again, it's on the back of a box. Be the first player to get to millionaire acres in life with the most money. Okay? Now, why you're playing and what you're playing are two different ideas. Now, in a perfect world, the purpose and the objective would be just married up, such that my purpose is achieved simply through them meeting their objective. In complicated games, that starts to drift apart, where increasingly they're doing something that is not obvious to them in terms of the purpose, and quite frankly, they don't need to know the purpose. Right? But I do, and I have to understand the linkage between them. That's what we call the analytic bridge in a lot of what the work we do, and that somehow I've got to be able to relate what the player did to the outer purpose. Now in the educational world, that's okay, the kids played a game, it had an objective, yay, somebody won. But now you've got administration saying, yeah, but what purpose did it serve? What common core, what state standard, what identified learning outcome did that meet? It doesn't have to be one-to-one, but you've got to be able to make the case on how what they did relates.
Well, and actually to kind of bounce off that and go ahead and go to the next slide, again, experience with middle school and high school students is that no matter what you're giving them, there's always that, why are we doing this? What is the point of this? Even if it's playing a game. And so when you're thinking about, I don't know if you're a teacher, maybe you've done like an exit slip before, for those of you who aren't familiar with that. So that's the concept that you teach something, and then before the kids leave, you give them a piece of paper, and you're like, hey, what'd you get out of class today? And you can teach the most kick-ass lesson that you think is fantastic. You're like, oh, nailed the quadratic formula today. And you're like, kids, what did you learn today? And it's completely different things than what you thought you had actually taught. I mean, if that happens when you're trying to teach the quadratic equation, you can imagine if you're having them play a commercial game in class, they're going to walk away with all sorts of different ideas. And so kind of bouncing off his idea, when you're planning to use the game, you need to have a clear idea of its purpose as a tool. And again, how does it actually enhance what you're doing? And unfortunately, I've had the experience of working with teachers who see games in the classroom as almost like a babysitting sort of thing. Like, oh yeah, they finished what they're doing and now they're just going to play this game. And again, I feel like there might be some value in just playing the game in that circumstance, but if we're really trying to think about drawing the learning out of it, then you need to have a reason for actually doing that. And that reason needs to be expressed to the students themselves. And so along this idea of enhancement, this is a screenshot of carnival games from the Xbox 360. And I wanted to give just a really concrete example. I was teaching 7th grade, and we were doing probability, and we were trying to get the idea of theoretical versus experimental probability. And so, they were flipping the coins and doing the spinners, but they didn't really have it down. And I was trying to think of, wow, what would be an interesting way to really get them to see probability in the real world and see instances where just figuring out the theoretical probability would be very difficult. And I was like, wow, it would be really cool if we could go to a carnival. And of course, we can't go to a carnival. And then I had an Xbox in my classroom, and I was like, wait a minute, there's a game called Carnival Games. And so even though it had the specific purpose of having them think about theoretical and experimental, there was so much freedom within that game because that game's divided into alleys. And so kids were in teams, they got to pick an alley, there were 4 games per alley, they could choose the one that they thought best illustrated an example of, oh, this is an experimental probability that I can use here, and I couldn't do theoretical because of blah, 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 blah. And it gave them just a lot of freedom to go different directions with the game and the concept. And we did it all in my classroom. So it really gave me the chance to expand what I was doing without actually leaving the premises in a functional way.
And the thing to really build off of here is that every kid has a different learning style. Like some kids are very visual learners, others are very experiential leurners. And this allowed for kids to go through and find the carnival game that worked best for them. So you would have a lot of kids who, maybe they didn't get the ring toss all the way. So they could go and look at other ones and find the lesson that worked best for them. So I mean, I had trouble learning just out of a textbook, and I would always have to go out and actually do the experiments. I mean, science was great for that reason, and I'm sure there are lots of people who are like that, but then I know plenty of other folks who can just read a textbook and get it. I always wished I could be like that.
Right, and I think the important point that's buried in there is the fact that, and you called it out on the slide before, but the tool, I mean, the games are a tool that are a means to an end, right? The game is not the end state, right? And so you have to start thinking about games as it's an enabling piece to get you where you want to go.
So that takes us sort of into the game creation part. We've run kind of an interesting study which has been surveying about 300 kids in a New Jersey school that have taken a game design course in the 7th and 8th grade, which is pretty early to get started in creating these games, especially if you're using programs like Game Maker or Unity. But what we found is that we've had some really interesting tests of the educational theories of like constructivism or democratic education throughout the course of the study. But what we have access to right now is super, super easy game creation. So you can see this is a picture of Kodu, Unity, Puzzle Maker, and Game Maker, which are all pretty commonly used game creation platforms, especially in schools. So we looked at how kids reacted to this class before, like a pre and post type thing. We asked them, so how do you see, a game creator before and after taking this class? And largely before taking the class, we saw a lot of negative responses to how they saw game creators, particularly in females. A lot of some guy sitting alone in his mom's basement, until 3 in the morning chugging coffee. But what we found is that over time, this kind of improved, one, their view on game creators in general, and two, their view on the career path. So we had some kids still at the end say things like, oh, I'm not into game creation, I'm into real business in Wall Street.
Yes.
That was an actual response.
That's a great response.
From an 8th grader. So we had some funny responses, but by and large what we had was creativity came up about 60% of the time for what skills people thought were really important, followed by programming, which would make sense. And then the last one was at about 30% was perseverance. And then we had other ones like patience and intelligence, those kinds of things.
Well, and I think the neat thing about actually having kids design games in school is that it provides that entry into computer science concepts. And I was giving a talk actually somewhere else, and we were talking about, it lowers that barrier of entry into the application of those concepts. But again, if they don't understand that, oh, what I just did was I created a loop and I had an event with this object and blah, blah, blah. If you don't actually articulate that, then those same kids several years later might not actually even sign up for a computer science course because they might say, oh, whoa, that's something I can't do, not recognizing that they already did that exact thing. And another sort of soft skill that kind of came out of this was you get the kids before they come in think they're going to make Grand Theft Auto by the end of the week by themselves. And so there's just these great comments. We made a very open-ended survey where I did not realize how hard it was to make a game and how hard it was to work in a team, and especially at the middle school level where it's so focused on self. It's just this great opportunity to design for other people. And in my math class, we used the portal to Puzzle Maker to do some just simple design. And it was fascinating because you'd have these kids and they'd come over, and they called me Mrs. C. And they'd be like, Mrs. C, come play my room. And I would play it how I would play it. And they'd be like, no, you're totally doing it wrong. That's not what I want you to do at all. And it was this great discussion about, well, you designed it, and clearly other people are seeing it a different way. And so it's just another way to make them think.
Yeah, along with the computer science end, even on the commercial game design side, many a computer game started off as a board game. That's how we do the alpha testing. If it doesn't work on paper, with a paper board and little folded up playing pieces, it's not going to get better when you jam it in the box. Okay, it's got to be a good game that engages you, makes you want to play it. But that play itself is often tested out on paper first. So if you're sitting here thinking as a teacher thinking, there's no way I'm going to get a computer science course going in my school to do this, then don't go computer science. Make them make board games. There have been schools now that are using board game design in the same way they use science fair projects. Okay? Think about all the cross skills that can get involved with making a game like this. The math. Anything that involves a die is going to have a probability curve you're going to have to work out. What are the right numbers? What should the probabilities be? So I just sucked in the math course. Visual and graphic design. Hey, the art teacher, okay? In terms of making game boards, making game pieces. The research that has to go into it, if you're doing anything that has any type of historical or factual foundation, they're going to find themselves in the library having to look up the background information. Writing skills. They have to come up with a rule book. Okay? Team testing, all that play activity. Alpha and beta prototyping, and then finally having a game night where the kids get to show off their games in something that looks like a science fair night, where they're showing their own games, they're showing, they're playing each other's games. You give first, second, third prizes, it looks like science fair for game design. right? And it has fabulous value.
And just to kind of jump off that, there's research that shows that you don't have to teach kids computer science skills or game making skills all in one chunk either. So I've had a lot of educators say, well, we can't put a whole game making class in our curriculum. Well, you don't have to, because research suggests that this is something that you can definitely spiral, and you could do like a unit on it, you could do a smaller chunk of it, and then over time those skills develop. And the other thing I just have to get on my little podium for a moment and say is a lot of the research about kids making games is based on kids making edutainment games. And that drives me crazy because there is value inherent in just making games. They don't have to have math in it. It doesn't have to be a fraction game, and nearly all the research that I was looking at was based on kids creating curricular games. And I'm sure there is value to that, but there's value without that as well, and that's something to keep in mind.
So we went over that. So kind of what we found, so I did a lot of work with helping indie game devs do their marketing, and that exposed me to this massive scale of creativity that I didn't even know existed prior to getting into that scene. And so one of the big things that I wanted to show here is how we can use indie games right now as kind of educational, I guess, centerpieces for a class, or I guess small pieces for a class. So the two that we have here are Bridget and World of Goo. I mean, you guys are probably, I would imagine, less familiar with Bridget, although it is a very cool game, than you are World of Goo, but both of them offer very interesting problem solving. So
okay, so Bridget is like one of my all-time favorite stories. So you're supposed to make a bridge, right? I mean, that is the point of this game. And so I used it with 6th grade because we were doing one of those like toothpick bridge building units, and I was like, oh, this will be so relevant, you know? And I want to say foolishly, but probably wasn't foolishly. When I gave them the game, I simply said, play the game, because my inherent assumption was you would build a functional bridge, because there's like a play feature, like you click play and it simulates this bridge. And so, you know, walk around the room and most of the kids are building bridges, and this one kid's like, Mrs. C, come check this out. And so I come over and it's just this mess. This bridge is just like pieces everywhere, and I'm like, Jesse, I'm not really, you know, getting what the point is. He's like, just wait. And so he hits play, and the darn thing collapses in on itself into a completely functional bridge, and the train can go across. Like, that was how he made bridge. So I'm already like, whoa, that's so cool. And then I hear somebody else, no, you gotta see mine, you gotta see mine. So I come over, and it's a bridge, you know, it's a functional bridge. He hits play, and the thing breaks. Like, it totally falls apart. And I was like, that's great. He's like, just wait. It's the James Bond moment. And sure enough, these two cars are coming opposite directions, the bridge collapses, one of them manages to leap over a piece of the bridge and make it to the other side, and the other one crashes into the bridge. And he was so excited, and I was so thrilled, because again, I just think that demonstrates such creativity in the way that they thought about it. It wasn't that they did it wrong, they did it differently than everybody else, and that game enabled them to do so. And then I also used World of Goo, which was just another fabulous opportunity to see these kids like with their own ideas, like this is the way we're going to do it, and you'd have somebody else say, no, if you only did this, and they're just so, you know, invested in their idea of what they want to do with the game. It was great. So again, it just gives them the opportunity to take it different directions.
Have you guys heard of The Bridge? This game of Seattle.
You should check it out if you haven't seen it.
So it's this really cool game. Are you guys familiar with MC Escher drawings of the kind of weird, like surreal staircase that goes every which way?
Yes.
So this guy made a game out of these MC Escher drawings where you would rotate the level as you walked forward. So you'd have to rotate the entire level to keep your guy, I guess, planted firmly on the ground. It's hard to describe. You can probably tell by looking at the picture there. But here's an example of a single guy who created a game that has huge uses for problem solving and sort of visual puzzle solving. But this was made by just one person in Seattle on their own in Unity in a very simple, like basic setup. He didn't have access to all this crazy stuff. He's a good artist, and that's I think about it. But this is how easy it is to just create a game that can be wildly successful and really helpful to kids in general for soft skills of all kinds.
So this, I did a unit, I called the anti-unit, and one of my students just kept nagging me all year, like, Mrs. C, you gotta play Anti-Chamber, you gotta play Anti-Chamber, and finally I was like, I haven't played Anti-Chamber, and I was like, whoa, this is like a mind-blowing game. If you've not played it, it's really, takes everything you know about playing games and kind of turns it upside down. And the point of the unit was to really get them to think differently about how they solved problems. And so I gave them the opportunity to play this game, and it was really fascinating from sort of an experimental mad scientist perspective, because they took so much ownership of their solutions. Like, you would have someone that got the blue gun and had figured out how to do this, and other kids would just say, I don't want to hear how you got that. Please don't tell me. And this is a math class that never, I mean, usually it's like, how'd you get that? Can I copy your answer, you know? So this was really unique, and if they wanted help, they didn't want someone just to tell them how to get it. They just wanted hints about how to think about it. And at the end, we talked, you know, what did you learn about? And the biggest theme that came through was kids were like, I have never been so frustrated when trying to solve a problem in my life. And I realized I have to find ways to deal with that. And so it was this, you know, great addition of skills when thinking about how to solve problems and how to deal with frustration, because it is a frustrating game, and you really can get stuck, but they were really devoted and tried to push through it in their thinking.
Yeah, and to the point of this here, in terms of gameplay and the kind of things we're describing, obviously you can see where any chamber does not have a one-to-one correlation with the real world. It doesn't have to. You don't want it to. We joke about reality is the worst game ever. It's kind of it's boring. Okay, and I face it a lot with the work I do. Obviously, we're using government and business type things where they constantly want more realism. We need more realism. I go find a mirror. Because apparently realism isn't helping you, or you wouldn't be seeking me to do a game to help you understand. So this idea that games have to look like education to be of value is just wrong. Okay, but you've got an uphill fight to convince administrators and parents of that point. Okay, but again, reality is not always useful. All right, we want to create artificial worlds to explore ideas that otherwise we can't get in reality.
And this idea extends, you know, kind of all the way out of the classroom. So this is, I'm going to talk a little bit about a game that we've built. That this is not for, let's say, you know, typical students. This is for epidemiologists, you know, people trying to learn how to do disease surveillance. And they're looking at the game space too as a way to help them, you know, number one, improve their abilities to make decisions within this space, but also to help understand what technologies and, you know, different ways could we attack the problem. And you can play that out in this hypothetical environment where you can make mistakes, and it's not the real world. So this game that we built here is called EpiDig, Epidemiological Disease Investigation Game is the long name for it. But I just want to call out here, you know, just because I was talking about the outer and the inner objective, you know, for that game, you know, the first objective that we had for this was just to understand the decision challenges within this field, right? So these are people who engage in investigations, you know, trying to figure out where disease started, where they're going, how to stop them, and they're doing this in real time. And it's challenging. And so one of the inner objectives that we wanted to do with this was just pose a problem for them and have the players characterize an outbreak. In this case, it was salmonella. But those were two very close objectives. It aligned well with what they do in their normal job, so it was kind of an easier game to build. So if we go to the next slide. The game is set up where what we did is we simulated a lot of information that they see in their real world, right? So if anybody's, I doubt anybody's an epidemiologist. Is there anybody in here? No.
So now you can make up stuff.
Oh, yeah?
Wait, oh, right there. Oh, yeah.
Okay. You should play this game. So the data sets such as, outbreak notifications, there's syndromic data, things that they would see coming back from the hospitals, which they're forced to report. And so what it is just this wealth of information that they have to sift through, kind of like the real world to a certain extent. And we built an interface which allows them to kind of slice and dice that data to access it when they wanted it. And what we're trying to do is have them work in a team to figure out what's going on. And they're making plots and graphs of this. And the challenge is to do this all within a certain time frame. So they're under a lot of pressure to make these decisions, just like they would in the real world. And as the people who are running the game, we're watching everything that they do, both from a computer standpoint and from just an observation standpoint, to try to understand where are they getting stuck, what are the decisions, what are the interesting things that they're doing, and how can technology help. And so this game, in some of the outcomes, we've played this quite a bit, both with professionals and students. And one of the biggest things in the game was kind of targeted at this was this notion of experiential learning, right? These disease outbreaks don't happen all the time, which is a good thing. So you don't have a lot of practice in making those decisions. And so games are a nice platform for people like that to practice making those decisions when it actually counts. this is, we go with, I say realistic here, but really the target is plausible. That's the word I always go for. I just want some sort of plausible scenario. The people playing the game have to believe it and allow themselves to kind of let go a little bit. And so now this game is actually kind of interesting for the work that we do. It's a prototype. It's a fully functioning prototype, but it's being used in public health curriculum now. So for those epidemiologists in the crowd, you may not have had that when you were studying, but now this is starting to show up, and it's helping us, with the research and development that we do, because we get to see now in a quantitative fashion how people make decisions, and that informs the technology development that we can do for them back in the lab. Understanding which tools may be really important to help them with their process. So, but there's always challenges with this work. You essentially want to get inside the player's head, the decision maker's head. I personally want to stand over your shoulder and be like, why did you do that? What led you to that decision? If you were to do that, they wouldn't want to play your game. So you have to be smart about how you extract that information. So we build a lot of tools and capabilities to collect it and allow us to build that insight afterwards. And then, in general for us, because these situations the scenarios are very specific, and the nuances in the data have to be there, it tends to force us to handcraft scenarios. So if anybody has a lot of good ideas on how to auto-generate a lot of complicated scenarios, or even build tools for epidemiologists to build their own games and platforms or scenarios that they would play for, those are some of the kind of the frontier issues in this work.
So one of the ways that we use games, I see a lot of people recognize this game. So how many people have played the Stanley Parable?
Good.
All right, for those of you who haven't, there's spoilers, so earmuffs if you want to. So we use the Stanley Parable, kind of a little anecdote. Lisa and I both played the Stanley Parable, and we were talking about it one day. And I asked her, didn't you just immediately go through the door on the right? For those of you who don't know, it's a choice-based game. You're presented with a bunch of choices, the narrator tells you what to do, you have the choice to follow them or not. But that choice is never explicitly stated that you have it, you just kind of figure it out. So Lisa's like, no, absolutely, or I went straight left and followed him pretty much all the way through.
The first time.
The first time. And I realized I went right. So we kind of concocted this idea that there might be, and I mean this is corroborated in research, there might be a gender-different response to authority and somebody telling you what to do, or just choice and decision making in general. And when we did our interviews with a bunch of, I guess, young high school students, we found that the girls felt a lot more restricted in their day-to-day choices and their life choices than the males did. So we had them all come in and play the Stanley Parable, ones that hadn't played already. We've run about 22 kids in our alpha group so far, and what we found is that there is a very stark difference between the way that females and males make decisions. About 85% of the females went left and followed the narrator almost all the way through to the end of the story, and the exact same number, 85% for males, went right and disobeyed the narrator and went all the way through and said, no, screw that, I'm going to do my own thing. So unexpectedly, so we're continuing this angle, but kind of what we want to get into is this opened up a number of doors for us for using the Stanley Parable. What we found, very interestingly, was they responded strongly to the narrator. The males were hostile to the narrator from the get-go, and the females all said, almost universally, we really liked the narrator to begin with until we realized he was crazy and trying to kill us.
But not only that, they also made these, because again we gave a lot of open-ended responses, and they're like, I really like the baritone nature of the narrators, like these very specific like male voice things, and we were like, oh, that's weird, we hadn't thought of that.
So we thought, what if we changed the voice? So this is the narrator for the Stanley Parable. If you had him envisioned in a certain way, sorry to shatter that.
Kevin is.
Yeah, Kevin Bray. So we've hired a voice actress out of Seattle named Kate Yeager, who is going to replicate as close as she can, down to the accent and the sarcasm, the voice of the narrator in the Stanley Parable. And then we're going to run kids through it like we would the normal test and compare it against the baseline that we already have to see, do females make different choices when confronted with a female authority than males do? And I mean, we've seen in the research that we've read already, the literature states like there is universally a negative feeling for everybody, even if it's very innate towards female authority, particularly when it's stepping on the toes of male authority. So this has spawned a number of tests. We want to play the intro with the male voice and then switch it to the female voice halfway through and see, okay, what happens. But I mean, this is just kind of a show how we can use these games to study how people think and how they learn and how they react to things across the board.
And it's just a different way, you know, a lot of the research is on like commercials and voiceovers and commercials, you know, and there's not a lot of research in, you know, game scenarios when people do these things, and it could give us a chance to kind of experimentally look at some of these things in a kind of a controlled environment with games.
And the coolest part about it is you can manipulate any part of these games that you want. We've worked with the developer to isolate where exactly the sound files are, but I mean, we could have done it in any way. Particularly with these indie games where the developers are accessible, they're quick to respond, usually. And I mean, it's been a fantastic experience. So, I mean, why not use games for research and education?
So, because as a segue, or okay, total non sequitur, it's just a tangent. Part of my life was spent flying Navy jets. And one of my colleagues is in the back there, another Navy or Marine Corps pilot. Okay, so you know the voice that's with the heads-up display in the automated systems in a military jet is female. And the majority of pilots are male. That's changing. But the majority of pilots are male. Again, studies on how different genders respond to different commands. We call her bitching Betty. Right? Because she's always doing the pull up now type of thing. Where it's usually what she's saying is, you're going to hit the ground. You're going to hit the ground. But again, studies found that male pilots, another male is like, what the hell is that? But that sounds like my wife. I better pay attention. So the point of the slide up here is, these are a bunch of kids at the War College, Naval War College, playing one of our family games. And this was a game that was designed by my little tabletop history company, where we started off, this game's origins were simply those big plastic battleship bathtub toys. Found them on eBay for like $9.95. They're made by the Strombecker company. They're indestructible, they're great. Bought two, gave them to my kids. My kids were young at the time. And when they got on the living room floor, started pushing them around, and they started doing the, I got you. No, you didn't, you missed me. Bullshit, I hit you. You're sinking. No, I'm not, you're on fire. Stop it. So as a parent, you only let this go on so long before you drive you crazy. And I walk in and say, stop. Let's just make some simple rules. Oh, here we go. We're building a game. Let's make some simple rules. Let's get some dice or something, and just make a rule that if you roll a 5 or 6, you hit the guy, and 3 hits, you're out or something. Just jump forward now. That game's been around. That started about 2001. I now play it with adults. It's expanded into custom ships, and it's played by teams. And the teams, the kids or adults, and matter of fact, when we play mixed groups, kids and adults, I won't put kids and adults together on the same ship. I'd make an all-adult ship and then have all kids ships. The most dysfunctional crew are the adults. But they've got roles to play. There's the navigator, there's the ops officer, there's the engineering officer, there's the commanding officer, and it's card-driven action. But what it forces the kids to do is, just through, without going into the details of the game, it's cooperative decision-making under time pressure. And they don't know that. They just think they're playing a fun game where they're trying to sink the enemy ships. Actually, we're recreating the Sink the Bismarck. It's the Battle of the Denmark Straits. And they're playing with those historic ships. So you can see them here as they engage this activity. They're not thinking about this outer objective, but we get repeat players year after year after year. We've done it with, actually with people who, with adult groups that are just looking for like Hasbro. This is not one of their games. So when they try to do an off-site retreat and they want to play a game just to kind of decompress, they'll play this. It's one of the games they'll play. So one of my colleagues in the back there, his son has played this game, right? But it's this idea that you can embed all sorts of learning objectives and the kids will be totally oblivious you're doing it to them. And that's the point of this game. And actually this game in its desktop version is available off of a website called juniorgeneral.org. So if you pop the next one, this whole idea about what's the point, okay? And again, we've kind of hit this numerous times now. What's the point? And to Lisa, as a math teacher, you're constantly bombarded with the, when am I ever going to use this? Okay, good grief, the quadratic equation. All right, when am I ever going to use this? All right, and if you're familiar with Ideas That Stick, the book Ideas That Stick, the same authors of Ideas That Stick wrote a short article called Teaching That Sticks, taking a lot of the ideas from Ideas That Stick and applying them to teaching. And they relate in that Teaching That Sticks a story of a math teacher faced with the eternal, when am I ever going to use this question? And it suddenly occurred to him that the answer is, you're not. This idea that, again, we've got to make a one-to-one correlation with the real world is missing the point. And the example he uses is going to the gym. When you go to the gym and work out, and if you're lifting weights, why are you doing it? Are you doing it because one day you'll be traveling down the street and, oh my God, there's a belt bar in the road. I better pick it up and move it. I know how. I've been to the gym. That's probably not what you're trying to get out of going to the gym. Okay? It's physical conditioning that has byproduct, secondary effects in other parts of your life. Okay? So if we go to the next slide, clever transition. The point with games and other activities is this. Math, often, even if you're not going into STEM or STEAM, since we stuck the A in there for arts now, even if you're not going into that field, my wife her undergrad is in math. She's a lawyer. She'll say that she still values her math undergrad because it taught her to think deductively and logically. So the idea that we have to keep going one-to-one correlation, this activity leads directly. And again, this is Adam's point about that, that analysis, that analytic bridge connecting purpose, inner and outer objectives together. This is what we have to start getting people to understand. We get all sorts of secondary byproduct, which are incredibly valuable. And when we throw our kids out into the real world, from gameplay, that we are basically conditioning them through one activity to survive another. And it's that type of attitude we need to take and convince people that that's the value. You know games are good. It's how do you communicate that goodness outside of just, well, it's entertainment. Well, it's so much more than that.
Right, and what's interesting with this point is you talk about these secondary effects of games, right? The ability to train your brain to do certain things. I tend to think of these as just behavioral competencies. And things like leadership or creativity or improvisation, those are things that come to mind as just, if you play games, particularly with other people, you're going to start to get those skills. You may be good at some, and others, you may need to work on. But if you kind of look at the space of kind of where the country is generally hiring, those are becoming the skills that employers are looking for, and they're very hard to evaluate, and they're very hard to kind of say, yeah, this person has it or not. It's one thing to say, well, I took these courses and I got this GPA. Yeah, but are you a leader? Are you creative? Can you think on your feet? Those are things that I think are all products of games, which I think it's just maybe an interesting coincidence, or if it's just kind of the societal interactions and kind of problem solving that goes along with games. But that's the gem, at least when I look at it right now, in terms of kind of how you can learn with games is those behavioral competencies. But the question, and you go back to kind of SATs and things of the sort. How do you evaluate that? How do you say that I'm a good leader? Maybe you are a good leader, through your play of games, but how do you express that to somebody else?
Well, I think that kind of leads into, so this is a screenshot of a game called The Cave. And yay, so I was like, nobody's in the cave. So one of the things that drove me nuts is I was also an advisor teacher, so I taught like the social emotional curriculum. And kids it was just a nightmare. You cannot sell a worse product to a group of 13-year-olds than like, we're gonna watch a video of Bobby being peer pressured, and then we're gonna answer a 10-question worksheet about how I would deal with a similar, so I just gave up. But what I was thinking about was, like a game like The Cave, you have 3 different characters that play at the same time. Usually you played as one player, but I was thinking like, if you took a group of 3 kids and they each picked their character, and they each have different strengths, and you have to kind of negotiate like, oh, I want to be the knight right now because this would make sense, and like put them in genuine situations in games where they actually have to interact with one another and deal with situations where like, Tommy's being mean, he's saying we have to do this, we'll work through it because it's actually a genuine situation versus us pretending to create a scenario which feels really false to me and to them as well. And when we're talking about this idea of collaboration and making decisions, one of the things that we did first out at Foundry 10 was do in-depth interviews with the professional Dota 2 players when they came to the International last summer. And some things that kind of came out, obviously, is they're making a lot of decisions under pressure. And so we're really interested in that idea of how collaborative teams can realistically do this. But the other thing that came through, which was really interesting, was all the players, nearly, I would say like 90% of them, felt that the thing that was the most transferable skill that they learned from playing Dota 2 were collaborative interpersonal skills. And like across the board, we didn't expect that to be so high. We thought it would be other things. And so that's definitely something we're going to look into as well in further research. But the other thing that we were very interested in is this idea of learning and novices versus experts. You know, how do you take someone who's just kind of beginning something, and if you've ever played like Dota 2, it's a steep learning curve, you know, there's a big difference. And what the pros said was that they spend the vast majority of their time watching the mini-map. And they said that novices, in their experience, spend a great deal of time watching all the pretty colors, you know, and you get distracted and you're looking over here. And we're actually doing a study this summer in conjunction with Valve, and we're going to look at novice versus expert eye scan patterns in how they play the game. Because fundamentally, we first have to show that what they're saying is actually true. And we're hoping that that is true. And just from our own experiences playing, it seems to be the case that the more experienced players are watching the mini-map more. And then we hope to build studies based off of that, looking at how you can quickly, you know, find the people that are going to be good, how you can get them from novice to expert in a more efficient manner. And that's obviously an important area of study across the board, and we're hoping that we can find some things that might be transferable and relevant in other domains as well.
So one of the things that we really staunchly hold as an organization is that one of the biggest things that you can do for this form of education is to reflect back on it and look at what you learned. I mean, you could show a kid, or you can have a kid play through a game like Adam and Pete were talking about, but if you don't bring back up what they learned, then they'll never remember it. Using the computer programming example here, where if you have a kid create a game, they learn all these programming and machine thinking skills, 5 years down the line, they might opt out of a computer science course because they don't realize that they did that and that they could do it and still can. And they still hold those abilities. So we really staunchly hold that we need to articulate and recognize exactly what it is that is learned through these games and not just have them play and then forget about them in the next day.
And some researchers in the educational realm would argue that the debriefing portion of bringing video games into the classroom is the most vital component. That if you don't take the time afterwards to go through, discuss things with the kids, then you've really wasted your time and you're not maximizing the potential. And I think that's one of our big things when we were talking about this panel, is we really want to maximize the potential of games, because we feel as people, especially people who don't play games, that's another thing that I often find myself in these conversations with people. I really want to bring games in the classroom. Well, great. Do you play games? No. Okay, well, you know, if you're not playing games, then, you know, how are you legitimately going to bring these into the classroom? And that's always sort of one of the starting places. But if you do bring them in, how can you really maximize the potential and not have this narrow focus that games in the classroom have to look one way, or games when you're working with people or trying to teach kids or adults? There's a variety of ways to use them, and that flexibility and that thinking and giving kids a little less structure so that they can play around with and find their own paths is really important, I think, in maximizing the potential.
Yeah. And, you know, I think, you know, just kind of reflecting on, you know, how to maximize the potential, one of the things that I think would be interesting for everybody here to do is, you know, when you get a game or you're playing a game or someone's, you know, talking about a game in the educational context, or maybe not so much in that context, it'd be worthwhile for you to think about, you know, kind of that, you know, what space does this fit in? What is that potential outer objective, and what is that inner objective, and how they relate? How does this help me do something? What can I learn from this? And the other piece of that, which is, I think, is a really hard thing, but we all need to start doing this, is thinking about how can we describe that transferability, right? What could transfer out of this? You know, what are the potential things, and how, you know, how can I demonstrate that? How can I show that to somebody who may not have a background in games, or may not, you know, care about games as much as I do? Because unless those things start to happen, we'll always kind of be at this beginning phase with games, where there's some believers who play games and they understand it, but there'll be the rest of the people who say, well, we got the standardized test and I can mine the data.
And the standardized testing, again, I can't tell you how many people have said, you know, well, but how is this going to transfer to my standardized test? And I was like, it's not going to directly transfer to your standardized test, but we're hoping that through doing this, you create people who can think and make a variety of decisions and think critically and logically and reason. And again, it gets back to Pete's point.
Yeah, so kind of, you know, as we're drawing down to the end of the hour here, which went really fast, what can you do? Every innovation I have seen in bringing gaming into the classroom, not just gaming, every innovation in teaching I have seen has come from teachers.
Yes.
Not from administration, not from the SU, not from the principal, from a teacher who had an idea and made it happen. East Greenwich High School in Rhode Island is now in their second year of doing gaming as an integral part of their World War I curriculum. And now, having successfully done that for 2 years running, the rest of the faculty is saying, hey, how can we get in on this? How can we expand this idea of gaming into other parts of the curriculum? Because a handful of history teachers said there's got to be a better way. That's you.
So we have a few minutes for questions.
Well, maybe line up.
Or yeah, just run for a mic. That's probably the easiest way to.
This is the wrong group to be asking to run, I think. I just wanted to address, I use games in my English classroom. We talk a lot about math and history. I just wanted to suggest there's two games that I've used pretty exclusively. One is Digit, which is actually spelled Dixit, D-I-X-I-T. It's just images on cards, and the goal of the game is to say one sentence that sums up the image, but you want some people to identify it and other people not to. And it's this great way to try to teach kids, one, summarizing skills, because each image is extremely busy. There's so much you can say, but also how to focus a message towards an audience, which of course is one of the most important choices you make when writing. The other one that I've used is Action Castle, which is a cooperative group game that plays like a verbal text-based game from like the 1980s, and you as the teacher kind of run the computer. You know, it starts, you know, you are at a cottage, there's a fishing pole here. Oh, you got it, all right. It's by Jared Swanson. He's got a whole group of these now, and it is absolutely excellent at teaching teamwork and group critical thinking skills. And the kids at first, they don't know about 1980s text games, so they're completely lost. But you have a few gamers who are often, you know, unfortunately nerdy outcasts, like we may have been when we were in school, and they're the ones that start to recognize things, and they're able to take a leadership role in the classroom, helping their peers who only play, you know, Madden or don't play games at all, figure out how the system works. And then the reflection is absolutely key for both of those. Talking to them, and I taught 8th grade English, talking to them about what they learn and having them figure out how to verbalize that and then, you know, write it down because it's an English class. That's absolutely key because it helps them not only figure out what they learn, but learn how to reflect, which is a much harder skill than a lot of us as adults realize. So absolutely, I mean, the games you all talked about for your field look great. If you are an English teacher, Digit, that's D-I-X-I-T, or any of the Action Castle games by Jared Sorensen, I think are both absolutely excellent. And thank you all very much for the panel.
Thank you for sharing that.
Just pop over to that mic, or we'll just go back and forth on the mic.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Hey guys, great talk. So I was sent on a leadership camp thing with my company some time ago, and we did a bunch of, like, you know, team building exercises, that kind of thing. And the interesting thing was that at the end of each exercise, we had to discuss how it went and so on. And we split up the discussion into two levels. Level one was like talking about the actual game or activity we were involved in, that kind of thing. And then level two was the outer objective, right? It was talking about, like, well, what outcomes do you get from that? What do you actually learn? But the interesting thing was that the company, or the coordinators, forced us to talk about level two most of the time, like the reflection part, and not so much level one. Mm-hmm. So do you guys find that there's a kind of healthy balance there, or a situation where you let the kids just go and talk about just like how the game went rather than like what they learned from it? What's your thought there?
Yeah, no, I definitely think there's a balance, because I definitely think kids will radiate to one versus the other. And I think, again, part of the value of discussion is that if you have a group of people talking, some kid will say something that, you know, is on a different level and will kind of help to pull the group, and you can kind of help facilitate that. But that is definitely a skill in and of itself, and because kids for sure will go into very like concrete aspects. Yeah.
I don't think it's kids either. Like the group is just all adults.
Right. Yes, I understand.
Like everyone wanted to talk about the puzzle, but not about the actual.
Well, and I think it's a new thing for people to maybe do that with games as well. I mean, it's not something that, you know, I play a game and I'm like, oh, let me sit and reflect on the internet. You know, I don't often do that. So it is definitely, yeah, thank you. That's great.
So in the interest of time here, we're going to try to keep each question down to about a minute, since we have about 3 minutes left.
Okay. And we'll be around.
Yes.
Somewhere else.
So mine's about the dark side, bad teaching byproducts from games, perpetuating stereotypes, creating addictive consumer behavior. As an educator or parent, how do you defend against that?
I mean, each other one. I don't know.
First, I mean, I can't speak to the classroom, so they may be better, but I'd say in my profession, I kind of run into the same thing where a lot of people in these very serious fields, kind of look at games and say, what are we just playing around here? But really, once they start to hear about, kind of the impacts that these games can make and the actual things that we can do in the game space that you can't do in real life, they start to change their attitude. So my thing would, kind of just lead by good example, and eventually people will come around. But
So I have a strong thought on that. So one of the things, well, first of all, is the idea of balance. That, you know, I've definitely had instructors be like, well, I'm going to play games all the time in my class, and it's not that healthy balance. But I also think, you know, it gets back to like Facebook and cell phones in school, and what we're teaching kids is like, we will confiscate that. We're not going to teach you how to balance your life, how to think about this in a healthy way. We're just going to take it from you, you know. And so I feel like with games as well, this is that great opportunity to discuss with the anti-unit. I left it totally open, and they could play the game or not play the game, and we had kids that were like, oh my gosh, I haven't done any of the other parts of this because all I've done is this game, and it served as a really great learning opportunity to talk with them about that, because those are issues and those are things that you can talk about as you're doing them. But I think if we just avoid this entirely because, you know, they could become someone who sits there and plays 20 hours a day in a dark room, we're not helping them to better understand how to navigate that.
And while piling on real quick too, again, as far as like negative stereotyping in games, identify it. Make the kids see it, and then when you do game design activity, you say, how do you work it out? How do you get that out of the problem? But again, we say any problem you can't describe, you can't begin to solve. So making them critically aware that, hey, what's wrong with this character in this game? What's up with that? How would you redesign the game? Becomes a positive engagement session.
Really quick. So my question regards to your slide on reflection. You mentioned that game debriefing, and to me, when you talked about it, it reminded me of when you debrief novels, such as, you know, Tale of Two Cities, and you discussing that sort of thing. But you also say a lack of structure is good. So at what point do you, maybe there are other educational models out there that I'm not aware of. I'm not an educator. Just here for gaming. I guess lack of structure is good, but do you point out those main themes that you want to make sure the students discuss? And at that point, you know, are there methods of debriefing that don't lead thoughts into one direction and that allow the students to see one thing, not they see what they see and then bring that to the foreground? I mean, I guess, how do you bring out what you want them to see versus what they see?
Exactly. So when I, for instance, used Portal 2, my very first assignment wasn't to do the puzzle maker and make rooms. Was they just had to go play the game for like a week. That was their homework, just to play the game. And we didn't talk about it. We didn't do anything with it. They just played it. And there were obviously themes that I wanted to pull out. But a lot of times, again, that gets back to that democratic teaching environment that I had clear objectives and I made sure to work those in. But I definitely wanted to learn from them about what they saw and whether or not that was, oh, I hadn't thought of that. That's an interesting way to do that, or to kind of segue into those things. But the debriefing portion is a little bit more structured, so that by the end of class, you might have done all these different things. But I also want to make sure that you know that this is what you did. And it wasn't huge. It was part of our routine, is that, okay, the last 10 minutes, we're going to talk about these things. And the kids kind of got into, you know, knowing that's what we would do.
And the thing with games, too, is there's such a personal experience. Like, it's going to mean something different to every person, since, especially a first-person game where you're kind of projecting yourself into it, you're going to find that all of these different kids are going to have different reactions, and that's going to cause all sorts of different learnings. And as long as you kind of, I guess, maintain what your class structure is looking like, that's a good way to keep the eyes on the learnings that you want, but also to allow for them to explore it for themselves and see what they can get out of it.
And feed off each other.
It'll be super fascinating one day when really, I guess, emotionally moving games go the way of how now movies and, you know, film study is. So I can't wait for that day.
Yeah, no, that's so true. Yeah, thank you.
Pop review, and we've got a whopping 3 minutes left before they set the room on fire.
How do you actually translate games in the classroom into concrete learning objectives so that the school board will sign off on it?
That's the beauty of, I feel like, the Common Core, because I feel that they're broad enough that you can make those concrete objectives come out. And there's also, like, well, again, I'm most familiar with like math type things, but there's the general learnings, but there's also the sort of like mathematical skills that they want you to learn, like the problem solving and being able to articulate your thoughts and stuff. So when I had an idea for like a unit, and then I would think about a game, I would sort of look back at, okay, well, here are the concrete things that I have to hit, and then look at that game and see how much it's not going to be everything, but as long as it's used as a tool to supplement, you can be creative, I feel like, with a lot of those standards.
Write it like it's so. Okay, my wife serves on a school board, okay, and so I know it convinces her. And coming forward with an answer is far better than coming forward with a problem. Don't ask permission, do it. Structure it and say so. We're doing this is the outcome, it connects to this Common Core. Next.
Okay.
Be confident.
And most people won't really argue. I mean, I did have a couple parents like, why were you playing this? And I had done exactly that, and they're like, oh, okay. So again, I think they're just trying to catch you without an answer. So if you have put some thought.
Thank you.
Thank you.
2 minutes.
This will be super quick.
Going back to teaching kids game design, have you looked into using Project Spark at all?
You know, I haven't yet, but I've heard about it, and we were at another talk, and somebody was saying that that was something they were really into, but I haven't used it yet. Have you had any?
It's on Expo 4 today.
Is it? Oh, well, there we go. Oh, cool. Yes. No, it's on my list of things to try. Thank you.
Over here.
I teach middle and high school Latin, and I'm really interested in using maybe role play or possibly like tabletop gaming to teach a foreign language. So in that sort of like teaching a foreign language, is there anything like I should avoid in terms, or any suggestions? In terms of like role play and that sort of like group interaction?
We're thinking. Catch us in the hallway. Okay.
I know I'm probably different from other people here, but I'm actually an early childhood educator, so I was just wondering if you guys had any suggestions of what kind of games to bring into the classroom, either video games or like.
Do you have access to like touch screen devices?
I do. I actually do.
Yes. So let's talk again afterwards. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh yes.
I was going to say, I'm a kindergarten teacher, and we just got a touchscreen computer for the kids to play, so we do it during center time, and they actually hooked us up to, I don't know if you're familiar with ABC Mouse.
Yes.
So, I mean, I know that's one way, and then there's apps on there, and, you know, you can get educational videos.
So, you people talk.
Yeah, the center, I was actually going to say, centers is a great idea.
Hi, I'm a high school chemistry teacher, and I find that I have an issue with gaming in the classroom, and that there's a lot of stuff out there for like biology and physics at the high school level, but I can't find a whole lot that I can convince my administrators applies to chemistry, and I was wondering if you know of any like repositories or anything.
I don't know about repositories. I know a couple of games. Have you used is it Space Chem? Do you use that? Yeah.
Space Chem?
Compounded. And Space Chem. Boy.
You want to learn about compounded, the designer in the tabletop area.
Really?
See, now you can write off packs right there.
Done. Thank you.
Hi, 7th grade math teacher.
Yeah, we're done. Oh, these two right here. Okay, we can get these two.
Oh, okay.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, 7th grade math teacher, and my school is 60% free and reduced lunch.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I have real challenges of funding,
Yeah.
and I do try to bring in. I've actually was able to get Minecraft to teach geometry.
Yeah.
Which was great. So I'm trying to build on that. I also, have to under the pressures of curriculum and Common Core.
Oh yeah.
Just wondering, any ideas for funding other than me, writing grants and going to donors' choose and waiting until I get money?
Well, one of the things that sounds really hokey, but especially with like the smaller developers, is I would just say, like the guy that made Anti-Chamber, I was like, wow, I'm really interested in using this in the classroom. I can't afford to buy all these copies, and he said, oh, I'll give it to you. And I had really great success. People, especially in the gaming industry, seem very receptive to wanting to work with educators. Many people that I've gone and talked to about their games were like, I would love it if someone could use this in my classroom. So I mean, it does take the reaching out to them, but I haven't heard a no yet from a developer that I've asked for educational purposes.
Particularly indie developers that don't have the bureaucratic hoops to jump through and giving out free copies of the game. So if you want to look at, then there's tons of indie games out there, especially on the floor right now that you can look at.
Something I got for today.
But also, if you hang around for a second, I'll talk to you a little bit.
Okay, last question we can take.
All right, the virtual reality classroom. I'm actually a lead programmer on a project right now, a virtual art museum, and Scott Christian. What do you guys think about the virtual classroom, like building ancient Rome inside of the Oculus Rift with a Omnitron and having a teacher teach inside the virtual world?
Oh yeah, and you don't even think of that, high end, if you will, virtual. There's a teacher out there who's been combing commercial off-the-shelf games like Assassin's Creed. Okay, Assassin's Creed has fabulous architecture. Okay, you look at Assassin's Creed and the one that's set in Venice. Okay, you can find flying buttresses, Gothic arts, all of the cathedrals. They're beautifully rendered. So here you have an opportunity to take an off-the-shelf game and look at that world, and he identifies games and spots within games to take kids where you don't actually play Assassin's Creed and have to go out and kill somebody. It's the fact that he sends the kids on scavenger hunts within those worlds, finding that example of the flying buttress, finding that example at the piazza. And it's all mapped out. So yeah, we're all about, again, remember I said reality's boring. Okay, so the more we can augment it with either augmented reality, virtual realities, again, you gotta get past the funding piece, you gotta make a clear purpose for it, and tie it to the curriculum. Yeah, I'm all for all that.
Yeah, it's playable here on the show floor at the Becker College booth too, if you can check it out.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks.